Hi all, it's Emily Rand back with another edition of LPL Corner. It's just me this week again. Hopefully next week I'm going to have a guest and we're going to do a mailbag. So if you have any questions about Chinese teams or just generally how you think the LPL teams are going to do at Worlds, how sad I am when one of FPX, IG, or LGD does not make it. Any other questions about LPL? Unfortunately, I haven't had a lot of time to watch LDL this year, so I'm not sure if I'll be able to field questions on that, but feel free to send in your questions to me on Twitter, and I'll remind people again. So that's next week. This week, it's just me, and I'm going to go over the LPL finals a little bit, and then also talk a bit about Suning, because I feel like when Kelsey and I did our semifinals matchups last week, we touched upon Suning a bit, but we didn't really go super in depth with them. We kind of focused a little bit more on TES and JD Gaming because we expected these two teams to make it through. They did. So we had our LPL finals as a rematch of our spring finals in Top Esports and JD Gaming. Watching these two teams play each other across the entire season of LPL, so spring and summer, has been really, really interesting. It's super interesting to see how well these teams seem to know each other, and also both of these teams going the series, I felt like they were each kind of trying to outgame their opponents in a way, especially in some of their weirder draft picks. The one thing I want to touch on before, like, I'm not going to go super in depth in the series. I'm more going to talk about strengths and weaknesses of these teams as it pertains to their possible Worlds performance, because they qualified. Top Esports won this series. They qualified as China's first seed. JDG qualified on points. These have been the top two teams in China for a year. And so you have 1 seed, 2 seed, very evenly matched. JDG won spring, top won summer. I'm going to start with level ones because I feel like a lot of people are joking about, oh man, like, like Yonkos tweeted, how are we going to beat these LPL level ones? We had a lot of really some interesting invades from typically JDG specifically in game one, but I think if you look at, I took a look at these teams level ones because it was a bit surprising to me that they both, that especially like JDG was kind of more the aggressor. They both ended up going for some more risky level ones only because teams have done this to TES before. So I don't know if this is something in their past few series like leading up to this. So I'm not sure if this is something that other teams have recognized in TES because they typically go for standard level 1 setups, but so do JDG. So that was really interesting to see because it's not like these teams don't like to fight, but I wasn't expecting some of the level 1s that we did see. A lot of them I think were in order to for JDG to try to get Kanavi ahead, especially with the Lilia pick. That first level 1 in game 1 where Loken ends up with 3 kills and red buff to snowball the early game that JDG actually ends up losing. Honestly, in that draft, I thought that we were going to see the Pantheon mid Lilia, which I talked about Suning practice, like they were spamming that in solo queue going into their semifinal series that they lost. But they ended up flexing the Pantheon bot. I don't think it worked out as well, despite the fact that JDG had a lead. There was definitely a timer on this composition, and I think that while Lumao had some amazing plays on other champions, they could have pressured with Pantheon a little bit more early before TES were able to get back into the game. So the story of this series really was like both teams kind of trying stuff out against each other, and TES ended up winning because they have kind of like a lot of people call JDG the smart team. I think what they have is a strength as a team, and I talked about this last week when Kelsey and I were talking about how they play around their mid jungle, and also the fact that Zoom is not washed as a player, despite the fact that he had a rough start to the summer split. JDG they get this reputation for being super, super intelligent as a team because I do think they are smart about how they want to play with the specific players they have, even with some individual mistakes that we saw them make. I think typically they do try to draft really well around the strengths of their players. And Top Esports, I hate to characterize them as this team that just runs you over with superior mechanics. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but will say that they are the best 5v5 team right now, and it is really hard to out-teamfight them. And JDG did do that at some points in the series, but I think that is TES's strength, and obviously people are going to point out the raw mechanics of people like Jackie Love, like Knight, obviously. We're all going to talk about Knight Syndra after this series. 369. I think some strengths and weaknesses with both of these teams coming out. I think JDG, they did make a few more mistakes as a team in the series. I think it could have been a little bit more one-sided in TES's favor. Draft depending too. I actually think JDG sometimes don't get enough credit for how smart they can be with the players that they have in terms of setting them up for success. But I do think that they are, if they don't get those certain setups, they are the like quote unquote weaker team when compared to Top Esports' top-down mechanics and also 5v5 team fighting. I think Yuancha massively stepped up in the series, and if Top Esports wants to win the World Championship, I think they have to continue to watch him grow and evolve as a player. We saw this as we saw the mid-season cup as kind of his coming out party, I guess, and he played well in the series against Lumao, so that was really nice to see. TES, I think the biggest mistake I want to point out, or I guess opportunity area for them that we've seen in some of their previous series as well, but was really apparent in their Game 2 draft when they picked the Fiora into the Camille, which is not bad, by the way. I actually loved, I was tweeting, I was like, oh, they picked the Sword Lady, because I really love Fiora. But then Top Esports didn't use her as well as you could by sending her into side lanes to go 1v1 against the Camille because she's going to win those matchups. Instead, they decided to 5v5 with her, which makes sense given the fact that TES are a 5v5 team, but doesn't make sense with this composition. So I think in the future, I don't know if they were just trying it out. It sounds funny to think oh, we're trying this out in finals, and I'm not in any way saying that these teams did not take this matchup seriously, because they very obviously did. These are two teams that know each other very, very well. They both really wanted to win. You could see how crushed and disappointed JDG were after this. But I do think that LPL teams, and this is the next point I want to touch on, when they face each other, and this happens at Worlds a lot, when they face each other, and they've faced each other all year, they tend to play a little bit faster and looser with their picks. They do tend to try out stuff against each other, even on stage. You can see this most apparent in the IG FPX series from last year's World Championship. I like to point to that as an example of how LPL teams tend to differ when they play against a team from the LPL that they know super, super well on the international stage versus playing other teams. Reserved probably isn't the right word to use, but I think they're slightly more conservative in their compositions and how they play the game. So I did want to point that out because a lot of people are going to look at the series, rightfully so, and be like, some of these drafts are pretty funky. Some of these objective setups are pretty funky. I'm not really sure about either of these teams. And I do think while these two teams do have opportunity areas, the important thing to remember is that some of these actually might not show up against other teams when they play internationally, because when LPL teams face each other, it's always slightly different than when they face international teams at Worlds. So that's one thing I wanted to bring up about this series specifically because of how we saw JDG and Top Esports reacting to each other throughout this series. Congratulations to both of these teams. I think they are pretty evenly matched. I had picked Top Esports to win this mainly because of their 5v5 and because the spring series was already so close. You could argue that Top would have won that game 5 if they hadn't been so uncomfortable with doing the lane swap that they ended up doing with Knight and 369, which was actually a good idea in theory based on matchup, but Knight did not look as comfortable in the long lane And that was one of the reasons. It's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons why they ended up losing that series. So these two teams are really evenly matched. I had picked top in a 3-2 because I thought that this is kind of their time, like narratively, but also they've had so much time to improve as a team. And despite how people were feeling about them from the regular season going into their semifinal, they massively showed up in their semifinal. So by that point, I was like, okay, like top have this, this is their time. JDG gets spring, top gets summer. I'm really looking forward to seeing both of these teams at Worlds and seeing them face other opponents from a variety of regions and seeing how other opponents face them. I know there are already scrum rumors swirling around from, I believe, Night Stream about them getting their butts kicked by Damwon. So look forward to more LPL team scrim rumors going down the road because, as I've written before, those are always really fun to track. The next thing I really wanted to talk about was Suning, who qualified for Worlds last night against LGD. They played LGD twice. The first series was a series that was a bit of a throwaway series because it didn't really matter all that much in the grand scheme of things, and they were presumably hiding strategies for the next time they play each other because it was I know the big thing around this team is that people are talking about the fact that their Vietnamese jungler SFM finally made it to Worlds after trying super hard. He's been trying to get to Worlds since he arrived in LPL. He's had a lot of fans from his time on Snake Esports / LNG, where he was kind of paired up with Flandra, and they were the insane like top jungle duo going around and killing people. Kelsey and I talked a little bit about SFM's jungle style last week, and he played really, really well in this series. I'm only really going to talk about the match that took place last night, not the third, fourth place match, because that was a lot more swingy. I can't help but think of how it affected LGD mentally going into this series, but because Suning just looked a lot more confident. They really knew like the first composition they locked in. Whatever you have to say about, the Renekton pick, the Lee Sin pick, like this is a composition that Suning wants. It's Lee Sin, Renekton, Syndra, Huanfeng on Ezreal, and Sword on Leona. Like this is top to down a Suning composition. When I talked about Suning at the beginning of the season, I had absolutely no faith in this team because their first series against LNG was really slow and really, really sloppy. And a lot of times in their wins, they improved from that point on, but a lot of times in Suning's wins throughout summer, there was this feeling that they were really kind of just sitting back and waiting for their opponents to make mistakes. And that is how they were winning some of these series. So to see them come out and have such definitive 3-0s minus game, I believe, 1 in the third, fourth place match, where Shia was like just absolutely popping off. They really had a commanding understanding of what they wanted to do. They will play a little bit slower than teams like Top or JDG, or to that matter, FPX and IG, who are the other two teams that are still in contention. One of them will be eliminated tonight when they play each other tomorrow afternoon in China. But SFM is the kind of jungler Kelsey and I talked about this last week. He really loves to farm, really loves to invade his opponent's camps. Sometimes to his detriment. When we talk about top laners, sometimes we talk about how they'll go for that like juicy side lane wave. SFM is sometimes like that with opponents' jungle camps. I believe it was like there was one point where he was doing, I think it was also in the third, fourth place match or one of their semifinals matches where he was doing red buff at a time where he could have grouped up with the team and fight, and it ended up costing them the game. Actually, I think it was in their semifinal. So SFM has his like massive strengths and weaknesses on this team, but I think it's such a good meta for him it's such a good meta for this Suning team. Huanfeng, they're more than happy putting him on, like, so if Caitlyn's banned, they're more than happy putting him on the Ezreal. They're more than happy putting him on the Jhin. His Jhin, I know everyone probably is going to look at that flash forward. Like, first of all, he had a pentakill last night. But then second of all, not on Jhin, on Ezreal. But then second of all, he kind of flashes forward as Jhin in the final game to be like, you know what, like, we're going to Worlds now. And they kind of brought up that he studied under Jackie Love, but also that, I mean, this is, his story is really interesting if you haven't read it, but as a player, this is someone who is looking to be, you know, kind of the next great LPL carry. I think he has shown that he's talented mechanically all year. And this is a really suitable meta for how Suning kind of want to play with, which is to have him farm up in bot lane and then join the team later on. Even if Sword Art is unlocked, he can really take care of himself well. And Sword Art can go roam on something like the Leona. For Angel, I think he's played really well. Like, when we talked about Suning all season, it wasn't that any of their individual players were like underperforming. It was more that they really couldn't somehow get it together in terms of how they want to play. And this meta has been super beneficial for Suning. I think Bin, despite the fact that he had some pretty rough outings in some of his playoff series, has looked really good. Not 369 or Zoom level, but I still think he is a strong top laner, despite the fact that you do still see some rookie mistakes for him, and you will see that. I'm actually really excited with all three of the LPL tops that have qualified for the World Championship thus far. So this is Suning. It's a great meta for them. It's cool to see Sword Art also return to the world stage along with Karsa from TES. So there's like a little Flash Wolves connection of both of them returning to Worlds. I mean, I did not believe in Suning for most of the season, and it is really nice to see them continue to improve and really look super strong in this meta right now. And it is a really good meta for Suning. LGD, on the other hand, one of the questions I had from them, and we had talked about how instead of a team like JDG that gives the jungle resources to Kanavi, and they get Yagao on a champion that he's comfortable with, but then he tends up giving more to Kanavi, then Kanavi is like ganking for him and making mid lane like this super strong focal point. LGD, we pointed out, was the exact opposite with the way they play around Xie as a primary carry for this team, with him and Peanut working in tandem. And I was really sad at how like lost and confused LGD seemed to look, especially when we talked about both of these teams improving to make it to semifinals. I am a bit concerned about LGD against whoever they face, and it's time to turn to IG FPX because that is the matchup that we have coming up, and it's really difficult to predict because of IG. I would like to see FPX make it, not because I hate IG, but because I always think it's really good when a team is able to defend their own title, even if they end up losing out in groups. Like, I really like to see when reigning world champions are able to come to the world stage and defend their title, because it's more rare than it is not. T1 SKT is really the only team that's been able to do that like competently and defend back to back. So it's something that's really hard to do, just like making worlds the next year, and I would like to see FPX do it. I still think that FPX, in terms of how they play, despite the fact that they have struggled a lot this year, they've struggled getting like Tian and Doinby's communication has not been as good. Crisp's early roams to set up those super early skirmishes that they like to set up with Tian and Crisp and Doinby have not been nearly as on point as they were previously. And I think, and I know this is again a controversial opinion because everyone likes to talk about FPX's top side, but I think whoever they start in top lane can be attacked. Obviously, Khan is the better laner. Gimgoon fits the team better. But Gimgoon's laning can be attacked either by a counter matchup or successive dives, and Khan's overextensions can also be exploited. And the team doesn't really seem to work as well around him as like a 4-1 or a 1-3-1 split pusher as it did with Gimgoon and the rest of the team working together to set these early skirmishes, with Gimgoon just playing the weak side. So we shall see. Again, FPX have not looked nearly as strong. I'm actually concerned with all three of these teams that are still qualifying. IG, for obvious reasons, again, Dogda and I actually had an entire episode about IG that is still very applicable to this IG team, which is basically that they can show up and look insanely good, or they can have just a complete, like, awful series in terms of draft and preparation from what we can see on our end. Obviously, I don't know how like good or bad their preparation is because I'm not on the team, but from our end going into that series, it didn't look like they had prepped for LGD based on what they did end up banning and picking. So I don't know, because on the one hand, IG can just show up and then suddenly look insane, as they always do. That is never out of the realm of possibility. But I would like to see FPX take this. I think if IG show up, it still should be a close series, depending on how well IG draft to their strengths and like their mechanical prowess. They could take it. I'm picking FPX, and I do think whoever faces LGD, barring another draft and series like IG had against them in round 2 of the playoffs, I think that I would lean towards FPX taking it, just because I think even with the issues that they've had, even with their form not anywhere near approaching what we would consider their world championship form of last year, I still think they've looked like more cohesive than what we've seen from LGD, barring that one series, and IG. But we shall see. I'm actually super, despite the fact that, again, I didn't believe in Suning, I am super happy with the way this team has played going through their playoff run and their regional qualifier run. So I think it's a great meta for them, and barring any sort of major meta shifts, they should do all right. I'm not considering them like a super favorite to win Worlds, but I think they should do all right, especially if, SFM and Sword Art can keep their rookies calm. And then TES and JDG, I'm really just looking forward to watching them go up against other teams from various regions, because I think they're two really good teams and have the potential to learn a lot, actually, from scrimming against other teams. And I just want to see JDG have some of these team fights against, a team like G2 or something. I think that would be really fun. Anyway, that is it for this week. Again, it's a short stream because it's me solo by myself. If you have any questions, you can at me on Twitter at League of Emily. For next week, I will be doing a mailbag episode, hopefully with a special guest, to talk about, again, like questions about LPL teams. If you have any super specific questions about champion picks, about jungle pathing, about support counter pick, about whatever, just at me on Twitter and I will try to answer it. And I'll also do kind of a call to action sometime after this weekend to ask for questions for that mailbag episode. But for now, those are the 3 teams that have qualified for LPL. I am super excited to see all of them on the world stage. And thank you for joining me for this past half hour. I will see you next week.